often people ring me or chat with me, and sometimes I'm in tears, because they're struggling so much.
It's such a relief, and just so nice to have, your own home and look out your own window into the garden. And
we didn't know what would happen.
And the reference point being the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. That was a real boom.
The law's changing put it on my radar.
And we just looked at each other and we just said, we're shafted. We've been shafted.
I was saying just a very simple thing, but you could hear the support that was literally at my back, And I thought, well, this has got legs.
Welcome to Candid Tiny House. In Season 2, we're delving into how our little shire here in central Victoria changed the local laws to allow tiny houses on wheels to be lived in on private property without a permit or a time limit. Last week we heard from two key tiny house advocates from the My Home Network, Kaz Nielsen and Catherine McGoldrick, who described how they lobbied the local government to change the laws again, even after the laws had just been updated 2 years prior. It's a great strategy session, so if you missed it, go back and have a listen to it. This episode, we hear about what the change looked like inside the council. We hear from Councillor Rosie Annear, who was mayor at the time of the law change and at the time of the interview. She gives a fascinating and detailed insight into what council had to do to overcome the problems that had thwarted the previous attempt to change the law. The insight that she provides helped me gain a deeper understanding and compassion, effectively, for the hard work that goes into changing the law at the local government level. Also, stick around until the end of the episode for a little announcement from me. But first, Rosie. We'll pick up where we left off, where Councillor Driscoll had put forward a notice of motion to change the local law.
And so Councillor Driscoll brought through this notice of motion. So after that, the staff went away and worked on that.
So you're talking about the elected staff had to go and research this? Like the elected members, or are you talking about council staff?
Council staff.
Okay.
So in council politics, we're not considered staff. We sit outside of the organisation and above it, which is a bit crazy sometimes. So yes, us elected officials, we obviously supported Councillor Driscoll's motion. It went through unanimously.
Yeah.
That's the first really good sign that, everyone's kind of on the same page.
Everyone wants it in principle.
Well,
like
everyone wants
see.
at least to explore what's possible. If it had come back and been something ridiculous, there may not have been support. But what happened then was our council officers went away and did some work on what was possible. So they presented us back with a paper, I think after a couple of months, which is around the time we give them, because it's, big pieces of work, around what was possible. And a lot of this was around the fact that there's obviously quite a lot you can do in terms of tiny homes with or without wheels, but many of them trigger the planning scheme. And what we were hearing from the community is that they wanted an option that did not trigger the planning scheme. And the things that we heard a lot about were the amount of time, not wanting a permit. People wanted there to be a commercial element if possible, and the other one was around more than one tiny house on a property. So these are the big things we heard even before we did consultation. The officers then brought us back a paper. So the way a council process works, we get briefed on something. It's always on a Tuesday, and then it'll come through to a meeting after that, which is always on the third Tuesday. So we got a briefing paper back and a presentation that really talked us through our options. And what they talked us through were the things that were not going to work. And these were things like the commercial element, so renting them to people. As soon as you bring in a commercial element, it triggers the planning scheme.
So renting long-term and short-term?
Any rental arrangement, any kind of commercial arrangement, as soon as that, it changes its use under the planning scheme, and it's the change of use that triggers the planning scheme and the need for a planning permit. And I will talk, hopefully, a bit later about how that's not necessarily a bad thing. But what we were hearing at the time was that people wanted to completely avoid the planning scheme if possible because, it can be complex, it can be difficult, it can be expensive, but you can achieve really great things as well through the planning scheme. The other one that couldn't be achieved without triggering the planning scheme was having more than one on a property, because it turns it into things like the use will become a caravan park, and that changes the use. And there's no way to avoid that. So we really got the things that were hard no's, and we still push back on a few of them, but we got these things that were like, if you want to avoid the planning scheme, this is not possible. Yeah. And then on this side, we got the things that could be explored. So what we landed on was the local law that did eventually make it through council. So it was changing the local law so that no permit was needed, so that you could have a tiny home on wheels or a caravan or camp on a property that had an existing dwelling for an amount of time, as long as it wasn't permanent. And this is very tricky as well, because the planning scheme talks a lot about permanency, and the way to avoid something being permanent and avoid the planning scheme is to keep it on wheels, basically. So wheels on, it's not a dwelling, it's a caravan, it's a tiny home on wheels, does not trigger the planning scheme. But as soon as it is not on wheels, it is a permanent structure, it is a dwelling, planning scheme is triggered.
Okay.
So trying to avoid that again, we went out to the community with this proposal that we would remove a permit requirement as long as the tiny home on wheels or caravan or tent remained not permanent and was on a property with an existing dwelling. So we went out with that. We put it out on Shape. We put it out.
What's Shape?
Shape is our online community consultation platform. So whenever there's something we need to ask the community about, we put a survey up on Shape, and there's a link to fill it in. There's different ways you can access it. Obviously, a lot of people like to still fill things out by hand, so we accepted things in different ways, as well as doing a bunch of pop-up sessions in different places to really capture people. And it worked because we got the most feedback we've ever gotten on anything ever. 1,616 submissions, of which is huge, and 91% of those were supportive, absolutely,
wow.
Which is, again, almost the highest number we've ever had of supportive things. We usually, if I can just draw you to another hot topic, the camp reserve issues say, that was a 49-51% split. Goodness. So we usually end up very, very equally divided on matters, but this one, it was clear. And while there were some concerns, mainly around things like safety and what if people were, I guess, behaving badly, what mechanisms there would be to ensure that that everyone could live as comfortably and safely as they could. But that was also really good feedback, because obviously it was things that our council officers were already considering. Council is, it's highly risk averse. Councils have to be, because we've got so many different frameworks and state government mandates to keep things safe. So our officers have to, operate within a very specific realm. But what was amazing was that we ended up with a recommendation back after all that community feedback had been processed, and it took a long time because of how much there was. We still ended up with a recommendation to take that step, even though there is inherent risk involved. Even now, the fact that we have no idea how many people are living in tiny houses, so we don't, if there was a disaster, we wouldn't know that they were there. But we're hoping that by linking it to an existing property, things like safe access will exist. If a dwelling has been built, hopefully there's been some kind of bushfire study to inform that, which will also inform where the tiny house goes. So we're really hopeful that tying it to an existing dwelling is mitigating some of that risk.
For sure.
But that's the scariest bit of any of these decisions. You have to, councils have a risk appetite statement and stuff like that. We're really lucky that this council, the councillors have a relatively high risk appetite when it comes to trying to achieve things for the community. But we obviously have to balance that with making sure people are safe. It was really exciting to get that recommendation back. We don't always vote with our staff recommendation. We vote against it, but the fact that our staff were able to recommend it and go, we believe this is doable, we believe we can mitigate as much risk as this, that was really reassuring. The fact that we had such great engagement from the community.
And such a high level of support from the community.
It was just amazing. So that when it did come back through council in June, we were able to vote, I think, again, unanimously to amend the local law And then that happened, and that was great. And then it was gazetted. That process takes about a month. Don't ask me what it is exactly. I'm not 100% sure, but I know you send it off and it gets gazetted and put into the local law. And now it's active. And asking our staff about it's really hard to judge uptake because obviously no one's asking us anymore. No one's applying for a permit. But from our staff, I know that the number of queries and questions and people engaging to talk about what is and what isn't possible has risen a lot. So they're aware that lots of people, if they're not already doing it, are considering it. And I know just from my friendships and my relationships around town how many people were kind of waiting for us to do it so that they could try it out.
Yeah.
You might know more than me, actually.
Well, people do call me and say I'm thinking about putting my tiny house in Mount Alexander Shire now. Plenty of people have contacted me and said, how do I get a tiny house on my property?
Yep.
Because of interests around living in community, around support on a larger property, around values for increasing housing options for people who are more vulnerable housing-wise. So there's a lot of community value and appetite, I hear, for wanting tiny houses on private property.
Yeah, that's really what we wanted. Going back, I sometimes go back and listen to old council meetings because, it's nice to remember what people said about different decisions, and going back to watch and listen to this one, we were also hopeful when we spoke about it because we didn't know what would happen. But I think, it was something that we're all really excited about because it felt like, I know from my colleagues who were on the previous council, it felt like it was not possible. And then to have our officers come back and say, look, it is possible if we do it like this. These things, no, we can't do right now, not until the planning scheme changes. But, that is possible as well because we know the state government are looking to do a bit of a audit of the planning scheme and hopefully, changing some things about small second dwellings anyway.
Rosie's talking here about the planning statement that was released by the Victorian government in late 2023. It stated that from now on, secondary dwellings built in somebody's back garden would not necessarily trigger a planning permit or a planning scheme. So at the end of this episode, I will be comparing and contrasting secondary dwellings to tiny houses on wheels because it is interesting to go into some detail about when it's more appropriate to have a secondary dwelling solution and when it might be more appropriate to have a tiny house on wheels, depending on your situation. So stick around for the end of the episode when we go through that.
Which is super exciting, but we also feel like we got ahead of that. We did something brave. Yeah. And that's really nice because sometimes we can't do anything and it sucks. Totally.
You've used your power for a yes vote, for opening the doors rather than closing
exactly. them. And I don't know, it felt like such a win for everyone. And obviously I know from speaking to staff who are involved in the process that it was really special for them too to see something like this through, to be brave as well, and to end up with this outcome that has made lots of people really happy when, so much of the time we're having to say no. So it was pretty special for us in lots of ways as well. Real boost.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that.
You need them.
You need boosts. Yeah. Absolutely. You spend so much time saying no and having to be beholden to other things that are outside of your control.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm really interested to hear about this bit about you're having to walk a fine line there, aren't you, between providing the safety that you're legally responsible for.
Yeah.
I can see how this becomes more of a leap from the council perspective of handing responsibility back to the people who are actually in their tiny houses and who are making those decisions now without asking permission or having any sort of assessment. You're really handing back the responsibility to say, you can do this without asking permission.
Yeah.
You better be making safe choices without mandating it. So that's... I now appreciate that that's a trickier thing than
it's not before. Usual for government to go, we will trust you to do this, but if you don't, we will have to come in and do enforcement and compliance work. So even in the new local law, there are a number of clauses that need to be respected for you to continue to live in your tiny home or your caravan or camping. And some of them are so basic, like not being a nuisance. Yeah. So this comes to many, many council things. Council is not in the habit of just going out and enforcing things willy-nilly. So say, you're not meant to put a trampoline on your nature strip, right?
Okay.
Say that.
Not something I've ever thought of doing.
But lots of people do, because they don't have room in their garden, so they put it out the front of their house. But council are never going to come and tell them to move it unless it's causing unsafety.
Yeah, it's causing risk.
Or harm, or someone
Yeah.
complains about it. So as soon as someone complains about it, council has to enforce. That is our job and our duty. So similarly with tiny homes on wheels, if someone is living in that property over there and they are having really loud parties every night and they're just leaving stuff everywhere, and this neighbour over here complains, council will have to come in and go, remember, this is one of the clauses. It says you need to not be a nuisance. So they're never going to come in and go, you can't live here anymore. But they will come in and go, you need to remember that you're part of a neighbourhood and you need to be respectful. And if it kept happening, they'd get, a number of warnings and eventually be told, you're not being respectful. But, that hasn't happened yet. I don't think it will. I think I'm really hopeful that it won't. The other ones are around things like disposing of wastewater properly, making sure there is clear access. The biggest risk that we could foresee is, if we don't know that they're there and there's a bushfire or a flood, we won't know to go and check on those people. And that's why linking it to an existing dwelling mitigates that risk a bit. But, I can tell that the emergency management team, the planning team, they're all a bit like, what if something happens? And, that's a bridge that we'll hopefully not have to cross. But it's an absolute fear that, that something could happen. But we were of the opinion in the end that we had done what we could to mitigate the risk and that the benefits outweighed the risk. And at some point we have to put trust in the people living in their tiny homes or camping or living in a caravan, that they would try and be as safe as responsible as they could be as well. But yeah, it's a tricky, losing that amount of control, which is only really about keeping people safe, is a tricky one for council.
Especially when you hold that responsibility.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So, yeah,
but you know
tricky
what?
one.
It is a tricky one, but I appreciate that you've offered it up as something that the tiny house movement can take up themselves, to say, well, we're going to take care of everybody who's trying to live in a tiny house by being responsible, So there's like a sense of community, that we're not going to be acting in unsafe ways, so that we can prove to the powers that be that we are responsible enough to manage our safety ongoing. And I think the tiny house movement does attract a lot of really conscientious individuals who really care about the planet, who really care about the communities,
absolutely,
who really care about
but I
the
think
planet.
What I've been noticing, and it's it's not just between council and community, it's between all levels of government as well, but that trust is really lacking. That there is not a lot of trust between federal and state government, state and local government. Community does not trust government. It's a real thing at the moment, and I think it's really nice. It's a really nice feeling to go, we're going to trust you with this community. Please see that we're trusting you and listening to you, and maybe trust us a little bit as well. So it feels like a bit of a look. We'll do it. We'll do it. And I'm really hopeful that it's just going to be amazing, because it's hard for government to trust, and it's hard for people to trust government. But I feel like
you've done that big overture, that big gesture towards here's an opportunity to trust us, and because we're trusting you.
But at the same time, it was community trusting us with their, with all the statements we got from consultation and all the feedback. It was people trusting us to listen. And we did, and that feels good, because sometimes we can't, and that feels terrible. It felt very, very nice, actually, all of it. It was just one of the more cohesive and, connected decisions we've made. It felt like really working in partnership. But on the other side of that, and I kind of mentioned it before, was the fact that both, we heard a lot from those 1,616 people and in the council chamber that it didn't go far enough. And the big things we heard were, why can't it be on vacant land as well? Mm-hmm. Why can't there be a commercial aspect, and why can't there be more than one? And for the vacant land one, we worried about that risk. That was very much like, look, let's see how this goes, and then maybe down the track we can look at that. But right now, as one of my staff said to me, this is the most potentially safe risk we can take. And that's really have to do it. This is the least risky risk that we can take. Yeah. So let's take that risk before we take that bigger risk. Yeah. And then obviously the other two options with commercial element and with more than one trigger the planning scheme, which, a lot of people aren't keen on. And also councils have no real control over it. It is set at state government level, and we have to, do the right thing by it. Like, our local law can't go against the planning scheme, but it also can't replicate it. So local law has to stay just right away from it. It was, it took us a long time to wrap our heads around, but because, planning language even is inaccessible. So to break it down so that I always say, I need my 8-year-old to be able to understand it.
You need first principles, so that there's not a lot of assumed knowledge and jargon and
acronyms. All of it. So the process that we went through internally with staff and councillors was really holistic as well, because we, at the beginning we went, all right, this isn't working. This is too confusing. How can we get the essence of what we need to know without needing to become planners? Sure. And they worked so hard to... it was great. It was a real teamwork piece again, and
I'm hearing that. I'm hearing that everyone worked really hard on researching this and working together to get everybody across the same essential knowledge and to figure out how you could use your power for progress.
Absolutely.
Which I really appreciate, particularly given that it was off the bat of only 3 years prior being shut down almost completely.
Yeah.
So that was a really brave set of actions for everybody on that team to have taken on.
And I think, honestly, now that I can look at it in hindsight, because this was only, this council had only been around for a year and a half.
When it was proposed.
Yeah. So we were 4 of us were freshies, basically, and we had 3 councillors continue on. But I didn't realise how almost triggering it could be for the team who had just gone through this process 3 years ago, and then to go through it again.
Christine Henderson was one of those people who was on the council 3 years ago, and then she did have to go through it again. Here she is reflecting on how she was not hopeful about what was possible.
I wasn't hopeful. I just thought we were going to be told, suck it up.
You can't do it again. We've been through this.
The rules, so and I've got these multi-page documents there. And anyway, the head of planning services walked in to brief us, as they had, part of the notice of motion required a briefing within a certain amount of time. And we got the papers about it. And I just sat there and read them and went, oh my goodness me, we've done it. Oh my God, this is it. We can do it. It's so good. And he just drops it. He just go, yes, it's permanent. Doesn't mean time. Permanent means the nature of the structure.
I love hearing about that moment from Christine. I think it's so great that she was so involved in tiny house living and tiny house law change, right back in 2016 when she hosted us in our tiny house on her land for 6 months, and she took a risk by doing it. And she advocated for change in the 2020 campaign to change the laws. And you can just hear the elation in her voice to hear, oh my gosh, it passed. So great. Before we get to the end of this episode, there's just one more thing that I want to share with you from Rosie Annear. I basically put her on the spot and I said, hey, there's this narrative that goes around about tiny house laws in councils, and it goes something like this. Councils are never going to change their laws around tiny houses on wheels in people's backyards because councils want their rates. Anything that interrupts their ability to collect more rates, they're never going to approve. So I said to Rosie, if this is a myth, bust it for me now. And this is what she said.
Oh, rates are... Look, nobody likes rates, let's be honest. And having to set rates every year is painful. But that it is how council gets income, even though, much less than it used to be. Under rate capping, we can only raise a certain amount in rates. So even if more houses are built, even if there's lots more houses, it's just redistributed between the population. We can only, this is at where, the lid is on it. That's how much we can get. So even if there's 4,000 new houses, it's just redistributed between the population. We don't get more money for houses.
Okay.
So it just doesn't work like that. I wish. But it doesn't. State government caps us. We can get this much maximum. So it's all just about it being redistributed between the existing households, which is why your rates fluctuate.
Okay, that's interesting. So, there you have it. It's not actually about rates. Sounds like it's a lot more about risk and trying to meet their obligations about keeping people safe. Okay, so as promised, we're going to discuss the housing statement now that was released by the Victorian Government in late 2023. Here goes. In the housing statement, the Victorian Government announced that a secondary dwelling on private property would not necessarily require a planning permit, so long as it was under 60 square metres and that there were no bushfire overlays or other easements that would require a planning assessment or a planning permit. So this is great news for removing obstacles to building smaller dwellings in people's backyards. Secondary dwellings in Victoria do still require building permits, and they need to be built by qualified builders, so they're not as DIY buildable as tiny houses on wheels are. However, they do represent a significant opportunity for people to live in small dwellings without engaging with the planning scheme. And, as Rosie was saying, tiny houses on wheels represent a great way of people having a place to live without engaging with the planning scheme. The difference is that a tiny house on wheels do not require a building permit, and you can own a tiny house on wheels without owning the land. So if you have enough money for a tiny house, but not for the land that it's located on, then a tiny house on wheels might suit you. If you would like to build the tiny house yourself, you can DIY it without getting an owner-builder license. And if your life changes or your circumstances change, you can take the tiny house with you. So, in some situations, the tiny house on wheels is a desirable option, and in others, a granny flat solution is more appropriate. Either way, the more options that we have for housing, the better. And the changes pioneered by the Mount Alexander Shire Council, the Yarra Ranges, and now the Surf Coast Shire are all valuable contributions to increasing housing affordability in Victoria. And now for a little announcement. To celebrate the change in the laws and the release of Season 2 of Candid Tiny House, I've created a database. Wow, a database. Crack open the Prosecco, Shannon. No, but really, it's a free-to-use database on our website at Fred's Tiny Houses where you can list an offer of land or make a notice about your tiny house and your family, so that you can see quickly at a glance if there are current opportunities to match up with your situation here in Mount Alexander Shire. It's free, it's easy to use, and it's freshly launched. Just go to fredstinyhouses.com.au and search for tiny house and land offers in Mount Alexander Shire, and make a listing to find your perfect match. Enjoy! Next week, we are drilling down on all the steps that you can take to start changing the local laws in your hometown. So stick around for that. Special thanks goes to our Councillor Rosie Annear for providing such a clear insight into council processes and for having such an awesome approach to being the Shire Mayor in 2023. And additional thanks goes to Councillor Christine Henderson for seeing through the changes in both attempts and for being a tiny house champion the whole way through. This podcast was recorded on the unceded lands of the Jara people in Dja Dja Wurrung country. Music for this episode is by Scott Buckley. Candid Tiny House was written, recorded, edited and produced by me, Shannon Schultz from Fred's Tiny Houses. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell your friends about it, rate and review it, generally share the love, and stick around for next episode of Candid Tiny House. Stay candid.